And our special guest is Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, who represents the 14th Congressional District and is home now in Peters Township. Congressman, thank you, sir, very much for being with me. I appreciate it.
John, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it too.
You know, you're home, but you may not necessarily want to be at home. It's because you're self-quarantining because of exposure to COVID-19. Can you explain exactly what happened to you?
Yes, John. So what happened was at the AG Barr hearing in the Judiciary Committee, I was in very close proximity with Louis Gohmert. In fact, he and I shared a desk because we were rotating desks to actually maintain social distancing. I was also in numerous conversations with him, and he and I walked from the Capitol building back to our offices in the Cannon office building, which is quite a walk. So out of an abundance of caution, when he tested positive, the House physician told me that I should go into quarantine, assuming that I had it.
Did they suggest that you take a test? Have you had a COVID test?
I've had COVID tests before, but I've not been tested this time. And John, here's why. It would have taken a few days to get the test, and then it would have taken several days to get the results of the test. Also, the risk of a false negative, thinking that I don't have it, but I actually have it, and then I'm spreading it. So out of an abundance of caution, the physician suggested that I just self-quarantine for 2 weeks. And so I'm following the advice, again, out of an abundance of caution. But I'm asymptomatic. I feel fine. This is truly just to be cautious.
So at this point, at least, you don't think you have COVID-19?
At least I don't have the symptoms for COVID-19. I feel fine. Truly, I'm doing this out of an abundance of caution at the recommendation of the attending House physician.
Are you able to conduct work then right from home like I'm doing and like so many of us have had to do?
Yes and no. So I've already been in several meetings today. I've dialed into a few. A few have already been virtual meetings through Skype and Zoom. The only thing that I can't do is I can't vote, which is unfortunate, but under the circumstances, I think the folks here in the district will understand.
Well, let's be clear about that, because the House of Representatives has provided a method for proxy voting, which I gather some Democrats have used, but the Republicans are not. Is that right?
What happened was Nancy Pelosi had a provision so that we could have proxy voting. The Republicans voted against it, and it is a show of solidarity. We're not participating in proxy voting. I personally am against proxy voting, but until the Republican caucus changes its mind, I'm going to follow the guidance of Leader McCarthy and not engage in proxy voting.
Do you think you're going to miss some votes, or is it possible that you'll be okay on that score?
I've already missed several votes because I had to drive home to Pittsburgh yesterday, and we had a lot of votes. Now, whether or not I missed the COVID package vote, I don't know. It all seems to me like this is going to take a long time to get a negotiated deal. So if it's longer than 2 weeks, I'll be there to vote on the next COVID package.
Well, let me ask you about that, because as you know, the news today on the economy is not good. I gather the economy has contracted at one of the fastest rates ever in American history, and we had 1.4 million Americans file additional unemployment claims in this last week. Do you think it's time for some kind of, I guess this would be the fourth package from Congress on coronavirus relief?
John, we're certainly going to need an additional package. There's no question about that. The issue is, what does the package look like? I think the next package needs to focus on two pillars. One is health, because unless we get the country healthy again, we can't get the economy back on track. So we need to focus on Operation Warp Speed so we can get a vaccine. We need to focus on getting more money and resources to hospitals, certainly more testing. We also need to focus on the economy. And part of focusing on the economy is getting our schools safely reopened. I want to stress safely reopening, because if the schools aren't reopened, then it's going to be very hard for parents to go back to work. So that's one thing that we need to focus on. And then, of course, we need to have some kind of, we need to look at some kind of payment to individuals, much like we have with the $1,200 payment. And I believe all parties are in agreement with that. That will get money in the economy right away. But anything over those two pillars, anything that's not focused on health and not focused on the economy is excessive. And I want to make sure that we don't have excessive spending in this bill.
Well, let me ask you about some of the things you mentioned. Testing, for example. Do you think that every American should be able to get tested and to get a quick response, maybe within 72 hours max? Do you think we have that? We should have that, and when will we get that?
Well, John, I'm in that situation now with the testing. I would like a quick test, but what the physicians are telling me is that the test should be reserved for individuals that are exhibiting symptoms, or those that are frontline workers that are going into hospitals, going into nursing homes, for example. So we need to make sure that the tests are being utilized correctly. Also, testing is not the end all be all. There's a risk for a false negative where somebody tests negative, but they're actually positive, and that person goes about their business spreading the virus. So although I do think we should have more testing, it's still not the end all be all. That what will really be the determinant factor here is getting a vaccine.
Well, let me ask you about, and the vaccine, of course, I mean, that's underway all over the world, trying to find a vaccine. And I get the feeling that things may be moving a little faster than some had expected on that score. Is that what you're hearing?
I'm being told that that some people are cautiously optimistic that we could have a vaccine heading into the fall. John, that would be a game changer. And I really think that at the end of the day, we're going to see a vaccine coming from the United States, France, or Israel, a country that has a robust pharmaceutical companies that are engaged in research.
Now let me ask you then about the economy, because you pointed out this particular concern. And as you know, there are just millions of folks, and including lots in Pennsylvania, in your district and elsewhere, who are out of work. They can't go back to work because their companies haven't called them back. They're on unemployment, and the $600 additional payment per week runs out this week. The Republicans in the Senate apparently say 600 is too much. They're offering 200. Now, mind you, this is the Senate, not you guys. 200. The Democrats say, no, we should maintain the 600 through the remainder of this year. What's your position when it comes to extended unemployment compensation?
Well, I think that we shouldn't incentivize folks not to go back to work. And the $600 amount in some areas of the country is a problem because individuals are incentivized not to go back to work, which makes it harder for businesses to reopen and to jumpstart the economy. That's a problem. Now, do I think we'll be at 600 as the Democrats want us to be? I don't know. Do I think we'll be at 200 where the Republicans and the Senate are? I think we'll probably be somewhere in the middle. But I think the most equitable thing to do is look at those direct payments to individuals, that $1,200 directly to folks. And that's, of course, means tested. So it phases out after $75,000 a year. I think that is the most fair, most equitable way. And also there's not the incentive for folks not to go back to work because they'll get that fund, they'll get that stimulus check regardless of whether they're working or not.
Yeah, but $1,200 only, that's 2 weeks of $600. And we've got perhaps weeks and weeks and weeks before some of these businesses are able to hire people back. The whole entertainment industry is shut down. Movie theaters and the like, symphonies. So I don't know what those people are supposed to do.
John, I'm not saying one or the other. I'm just saying I don't want to take the direct stimulus off the table. So it's not one or the other, but I'm saying maybe there's room for negotiations where there's 2 stimulus payments in return for dropping the UC rate down to something closer to $200, $300. But at the end of the day, we know that in a lot of places around the country, individuals are not going back to work because they're getting paid more to stay at home and not to go back to work. And I don't want to begrudge anybody money, but it's making it very difficult for businesses to reopen because they don't have the workforce available. And when they do get folks to come back to work, they've got to pay above and beyond that $600 a week, which is skewing salaries and wages, which is a problem.
Are you hearing that, Congressman, in Pittsburgh, in this area? Are you hearing from employers who tell you this has been a big problem?
Small businesses are telling me that it is an issue. Not only are they having a hard time getting folks coming back to work, when folks do come back to work, they've got to pay above that money. So I'm hearing that from constituents and businesses here in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Finally, let me ask you a little bit about politics here. You are running for re-election in your 14th congressional district. The election is November 3rd. Thanks to Republicans in Harrisburg, along with Democrats, we now have a mail-in ballot system so that if you're home with COVID or you're self-quarantining, you can vote by mail. But the president seems very concerned about this, and today suggested in a tweet that perhaps we should delay the November election. What's your view on delaying the November election?
Well, I think that's Trump just being Trump. The election is set by Congress, and we're going to have the election on November 3rd. It's been set. We're going to have the election that day. Now, when it comes to mail-in ballots, I think that's a really good option, especially for seniors who don't want to come out to the poll and risk it. But I'd encourage folks to get their mail-in ballots now, send them in, lock in your votes. But when it comes to mail-in ballots, my big concern is inequity. I think that if we do have a 100% mail-in ballot or a mail-in option without excuses, that's all well and good. I just want uniform application of the law. I want free and fair elections, whether they're by mail or in person.
Well, I think that's perfect common sense. You don't want one county doing something differently than another county when it comes to mail-in ballots. And I think it is governed by state law. At least I suspect it is when it comes to the right to do a mail-in ballot. I was interviewing the Secretary of State here in Pennsylvania, who, as you know, is in charge of elections. And she was pointing out that I think similar to what you might have just said is that getting those mail-in ballots early, and in Pennsylvania, the state is urging the counties to return ballots to applicants as early as mid-September, is a good way to make sure that the U.S. Postal Service actually gets your ballot in. And of course, you can track it. So if your ballot does not get to the vote, get into your county elections bureau, you can take some action. But are there some concerns about all that process?
Well, what I'm really concerned about is what I saw in the primary, because the governor here in Pennsylvania had some places that changed the rules halfway through. You had actually within counties different rules. That is the problem. You actually saw some inconsistencies in California and some other areas. So again, I have no problem with mail-in ballots. I just want fair and uniform application of the law within the various states. I don't want county by county making decisions or precincts by precincts having different rules and regulation. That leads to fraud. That leads to voter confusion. Obviously, both of those need to be avoided. But as a general rule, I'm not against mail-in ballots. In fact, I'm encouraging individuals, especially seniors, to vote by mail if they have concerns over COVID-19.
And then with respect to all of this, I know you're no longer a state senator, so you don't have a say in this, but there's been a bipartisan effort to try to allow county elections departments to start at least processing all the mail-in ballots. As you know, some counties took weeks to get the results of the primary. Philadelphia took, I think, over 2 to 3 weeks before we had a result. And nobody wants that on November 3rd. And so the thought is that folks can start earlier processing the mail-in ballots. Do you have a view on this one?
John, just 2 quick thoughts. One is that the votes are in, that vote can't change. So if you need to process it, process it. But if we're going to do that, and this is my second point, it needs to be uniform throughout the state. So it can't be different in Allegheny County as it is in Washington or Westmoreland County. It needs to be uniform and standardized throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, whatever we decide to do.
Yes, and I think that is the desire of at least those I've heard who have advocated for this, that all 67 counties be given an additional 2 or 3 weeks before the election day so they can start processing the mail-in votes. And we can actually know who wins, whether you win in your district or who wins the state of Pennsylvania statewide. So
well, hopefully we don't have a 2000 election scenario where we're counting hanging chads and we're waiting for weeks. Hopefully we can avoid that this election cycle.
None of us wants that in any of the elections in Pennsylvania. So thank you again, Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate you taking time. Stay safe. Hope you're going to be okay in that home of yours. And I know we'll be back in touch. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Most of the rain is south of Pittsburgh, but we have a few areas of heavier rain north of town. So we have a couple areas